I have watched, throughout the long corridors of time, a strange phenomenon that repeats itself with the precision of the celestial spheres. Those who become spiritually evolved, those mysterious souls who carry an intuition sharper than any blade I forged in my workshops, seem to disappear from the crowd. And if you have ever felt this quiet tug from within, this subtle invitation to step away from the noise of the world without knowing why, then you have already touched the invisible thread that guides such beings. Why spiritually evolved souls disappear from the crowd is not a riddle meant for scholars. It is a truth carved in the anatomy of human consciousness, hidden like the delicate workings inside the gears of a clock I once dissembled just to understand its secret heartbeat. When I speak of these souls, I do not refer to saints or sages perched above the world. I mean the ones who observe life the same way I once observed the play of light over a bowl of water, silent, patient, aware that every ripple reveals a shape beneath the surface. These individuals walk among us as if surrounded by a faint veil, a thin membrane separating them from the theater of ordinary life. They are mysterious because they refuse to be confined to the roles society writes for its actors. Intuitive because they sense the movement behind the movement, like a painter who sees the gesture forming before the brush touches the canvas. Spiritual because their inner world has grown so vast that the noise of the market square feels like a cramped room with low ceilings. Perhaps you have felt this too, a sudden tiredness around crowds, not from the people themselves, but from the endless masks they wear. A strange discomfort in conversations where words are exchanged like counterfeit coins, empty of value. A quiet suspicion that the world runs on illusions agreed upon merely because questioning them would require too much courage. If you have sensed this, then you are closer to these disappearing souls than you think. Do not be alarmed. It is merely the first crack in the plaster of the grand facade. I have seen in my many studies of human nature that the more a person awakens, the more they become like the light entering a dark chamber. At first, the dust dances beautifully, revealing shapes, textures, forgotten corners. But then, the eyes adjust, and one realizes just how much dust there truly is. And so the evolved soul steps back, not out of fear nor superiority, but because the brightness within them grows too intense to be wasted on the dim corridors where most prefer to wander. They disappear not as fugitives, but as artists retreating to their studios, knowing that creation requires solitude, precision, and an unbroken communion with the quiet forces that shape a life. Imagine standing in a bustling plaza. Everything moves, everything shouts, everything demands your attention. But inside you another movement begins, a subtle shift, like the slow opening of a mechanical flower. You begin to see the truth behind the gestures, the small lies people tell themselves, the frantic search for meaning in places where no meaning can be found. And suddenly, the crowd feels heavy, like a cloak soaked in rain. This sensation is not misanthropy. It is clarity. It is vision. It is the first sign that your inner senses are awakening, stretching like a newly restored painting exposed to fresh air after centuries in the shadows. Spiritually evolved souls disappear from the crowd because they no longer need the validation of the crowd. Their compass points inward, where the true architecture of life is drawn with strokes of intuition rather than the shaky lines of society's expectations. When a person begins to sense this internal geometry, they are no longer satisfied with noise. They crave resonance. They are no longer satisfied with attention. They crave authenticity. They are no longer satisfied with movement. They crave direction. If this resonates within you, understand that there is nothing wrong with your growing distance from the world. You are not broken. You are simply stepping out of the shallow waters where most prefer to stay. You are learning to breathe in a different way, through an inner lung that no anatomy book could ever capture. And like the flight of a bird I sketched once in the margins of my notebook, your soul begins to ascend, not upward, but inward, toward a horizon only you can see. The disappearance of the spiritually evolved is not an escape. It is a return to themselves, a return to the silent workshop where their essence takes shape, where intuition sharpens like a blade, and where the spirit becomes a mirror so polished it reflects the world as it truly is, not as mankind pretends it to be. They vanish from the crowd because the crowd clings to surfaces, while they seek depths. They vanish because the world applauds noise, while they have learned to speak with silence. They vanish because the many chase certainty, while they have discovered the profound freedom that exists in not knowing, in observing, in feeling the subtle vibrations most ignore. And perhaps, without realizing, you too have already begun to disappear. I have often wondered why those who sense life deeply begin to drift away from the places where humanity gathers to celebrate its own noise. It is not that spiritually evolved souls abandon the world, but rather that the world loosens its grip on them. The crowd, with its clamor and constant hunger for distraction, becomes like a painting viewed from too close. You see only the rough strokes, the imperfections, the layers of pigment colliding without harmony. But step back, widen the gaze, and the truth emerges with striking clarity. I learned this early in my craft. Distance reveals meaning, and it is this distance that begins to grow inside the intuitive, the mysterious, the spiritually attuned. As intuition sharpens, the senses undergo a subtle transformation. What once felt like ordinary conversations now echo like hollow chambers where voices bounce but never sink in. What once felt like belonging now feels like confinement, as if the walls of a familiar room have quietly shifted inward. The evolved soul senses when a space is built on borrowed beliefs, when people speak from habit instead of honesty, when gatherings serve only to numb the inner disquiet rather than confront it. I have watched this thousands of times. Men and women who begin to perceive the hidden anatomy of human emotion, the delicate ligaments of fear, ambition, insecurity, and longing, pulling each gesture into motion. And once you see these inner mechanisms, it becomes impossible to unsee them. There is a loneliness in this awakening, but it is not the loneliness of absence. It is the loneliness of expansion. The soul grows, stretches, learns to inhabit new dimensions of perception, and the old spaces simply no longer fit. Imagine living in a small room all your life, believing it to be the entire world. Then one day, a beam of light slips through a crack and reveals a hidden passage beyond the wall. Once glimpsed, that passage cannot be ignored. You walk toward it not out of disdain for the room, but because the passage calls you with a truth more honest than any comfort you have known. This is how the spiritually evolved move. They follow the quiet openings, the subtle revelations, the inner nudges that the crowd is too distracted to notice. And yet, this disappearance carries its own burden. There is a particular ache that comes from seeing what others do not. I have felt it myself while observing a flock of birds moving in perfect unity across a twilight sky. Most saw only the birds. I saw the invisible lines, the geometry of intention, the silent language guiding their wings. Such vision is a blessing, but it also separates. It demands a kind of inner stillness that the crowd does not understand. It demands a loyalty to one's inner voice, even when that voice speaks in riddles, even when it leads you away from the familiar warmth of company. Perhaps you know this ache, the sensation of standing among many yet feeling as though you have already stepped into a different dimension. The words around you scatter like dust. The laughter sounds rehearsed. The conversations feel painted, not lived. You smile, you nod, but something inside you remains untouched, observing from a distance. You sense the energy of the room shifting like shadows across a fresco. You detect tensions long before they erupt, falsehoods long before they are spoken. You feel the vibrations beneath someone's smile, the tremble in their silence, the fractures in their self-perception. You see the human face not as a mask, but as a mosaic of hidden stories. This sensitivity is not weakness, it is heightened perception, and such perception becomes both a compass and a burden. The spiritually evolved do not disappear because they reject humanity. They disappear because they begin to hear the faint music beneath life's surface, a melody too subtle for the marketplace, too tender for the crowd's restless limbs. They withdraw to protect this music, to listen to it fully, to allow it to shape their inner world without interruption. There is also a strange paradox. The more intuitive one becomes, the more one perceives the pain of others. Their fears, their longing, their confusion, they become almost visible, like faint strokes of charcoal beneath the final layers of a portrait. You sense their suffering even when they smile. You detect their self-deception even when they speak with conviction. In the crowd, this becomes overwhelming, a torrent of unfiltered humanity pouring into your awareness. Most people build barriers to protect themselves from such perception. But spiritually evolved souls, perhaps you among them, are born without such defenses. You feel everything. And when you feel everything, you must retreat, not out of coldness, but out of necessity. The world treats sensitivity as fragility, yet I have learned that sensitivity is merely the beginning of true vision. It is the blossoming of a deeper intelligence, one that does not rely on reason alone, but on the subtle interplay of intuition and emotion. It is the kind of intelligence that listens to what is not said, sees what is not shown, understands what others have not yet dared to understand about themselves. And once awakened, this intelligence refuses to be drowned in the noise of the many. So the evolved soul steps back, first slightly, then more boldly. They begin to choose solitude not as isolation, but as nourishment. They seek conversations that feel alive, not rehearsed. They search for the rare souls who speak with the authenticity of someone who has looked within and not recoiled. They are drawn to the quiet corners, the moments between breaths, the spaces where the world softens and reveals its true nature. They disappear from the crowd because they crave not entertainment, but presence, not attention, but connection, not certainty, but depth. If you find yourself drifting away in this manner, do not fear the distance growing between you and the world you once walked in. You are not becoming less human. You are becoming more aware. You are shedding the layers that no longer belong to you, like removing heavy garments worn for far too many winters. The world may not understand, but understanding was never the purpose. Awakening was. There comes a moment in the evolution of a soul when the familiar rhythm of the world begins to sound strangely distant, like music heard through thick stone walls. You can still recognize the melody, but something in you no longer moves to its beat. This is the moment when the spiritually evolved begin to withdraw, not because they fail to understand the world, but because they understand it too well, and such clarity carries a weight that few are prepared to bear. I have witnessed this countless times, both in myself and in others, the gradual awakening to the truth that much of what humanity calls life is constructed from illusions crafted to soothe the restless mind. People cling to these illusions because facing their own interior emptiness feels too frightening. They fill their days with noise, with arguments, with endless pursuits, believing that constant movement equals progress. But when your perception sharpens, you begin to notice that most movements lead nowhere, like actors pacing across a stage not to advance the story, but to distract from the absence of one. The spiritually evolved soul, however, cannot participate in this theater without feeling a quiet sorrow. You see the machinery behind the curtain, the hidden wires pulling at people's emotions, the scripts they recite without thinking. You recognize how fear choreographs their choices, how insecurity paints their desires, how longing shapes their every gesture. It is as if the entire world is a fresco peeling at the edges, and only a handful of people notice the cracks. Once you see those cracks, pretending they are not there becomes impossible. This sharpened vision makes ordinary interactions feel heavier than they should. The small talk that once felt harmless now feels like a kind of exile. Conversations steeped in superficiality drain you, not because you disdain others, but because every word feels like a step away from your own truth. You sense when someone hides behind a smile, when their eyes betray a storm they refuse to name. You feel their anxiety ripple across the air, subtle as the tremble of a candle flame. The world becomes an intricate anatomy of invisible forces, and you cannot help but read it like a manuscript written in a familiar hand. And so you begin to disappear. Not dramatically, not abruptly, but gently, like ink fading from parchment as the years pass. At first, you pull back from places where energy feels chaotic, where people speak only to avoid silence, where gatherings serve to mask the disquiet each person carries. You withdraw from those who drain your spirit with their unresolved pain, those who cling to you hoping you will fill the void they refuse to face. You stop seeking approval from those who cannot comprehend the language your soul has begun to speak. This disappearance, however, is not born from arrogance. It is born from self-preservation. Imagine a delicate mechanism, one of those I once crafted with gears small as seeds, exposed to a workshop filled with dust and loud hammers. Its precision would be compromised, its purpose disrupted. Similarly, the spiritually evolved soul becomes a finely tuned instrument, and the world's noise threatens its alignment. To function, to create, to reflect truthfully, it needs quiet. It needs space. It needs air untouched by the fog of collective confusion. There is also a deeper transformation at play, one that many fear to acknowledge, As the noise of the world grows distant, the noise within grows louder. Old wounds rise to the surface. Old illusions break apart. Old identities crumble like plaster touched by moisture. The spiritually evolved cannot hide from themselves. Their vision, sharpened outwardly, now turns inward. They see their own contradictions, their own shadows, their own fears, with a clarity that can feel both liberating and merciless. This inner confrontation demands solitude, because no one can guide you through the landscape of your own soul except yourself. You begin to sense that disappearing is not abandonment, it is refinement. Just as I would scrape away layers of paint to uncover the original line, you peel away the layers of your own conditioning to uncover a self that existed before the world told you who to be. This process is neither gentle nor glamorous. It requires courage to sit with your silence, to listen to the truths rising like echoes in a cathedral. And so the evolved soul steps away from the crowd, not to escape life, but to meet it more honestly. But there is another, subtler reason for this withdrawal. The more spiritually attuned one becomes, the more acutely one feels the fragility of life itself. You notice the fleeting nature of every moment, the impermanence etched into every face, the quiet tragedies unfolding behind every door. This awareness softens you, makes you more compassionate, but also more protective of your energy. You feel the world the way a painter feels light, intimately, deeply, almost painfully. And because of this, you choose where to place your attention with the same care I once used when choosing pigments for a fresco. You cannot waste your spirit on what does not resonate with your deeper purpose. Some will misunderstand your withdrawal. They will call it coldness, aloofness, arrogance. They will say you have changed, become distant, unreachable. But the truth is far simpler. You have begun to see. You have begun to feel. You have begun to move in harmony with an inner truth that cannot be explained to those who have not yet heard their own. You are no longer interested in being seen. You are interested in seeing. You are no longer interested in being understood. You are interested in understanding. You are no longer interested in belonging. You are interested in becoming. And becoming requires space. Thus, spiritually evolved souls disappear not because they reject humanity, but because they refuse to abandon their own evolution. They move quietly to the edges of the crowd, observing with compassion, choosing their steps with intention. They disappear to preserve what is awakening within them, to protect the delicate flame of consciousness that the winds of the world could easily extinguish. They disappear because the journey inward has begun, and once that journey starts, the outer world becomes but a faint echo of a deeper reality calling your name. Yet there comes a turning point, a moment so subtle that most would overlook it, but to the spiritually evolved it feels like the quiet shifting of tectonic plates beneath the soul. It is the moment when the disappearance from the crowd is no longer an escape from noise, but a return to a deeper harmony. For much of one's inner evolution, solitude feels like distance. Distance from people, from old identities, from conversations that once felt familiar. But eventually something astonishing happens. The distance begins to reveal itself as clarity, and the clarity begins to reveal itself as freedom. I once studied the mechanics of flight, fascinated by how birds seem to trust the invisible. Their wings carve pathways through air they cannot see, movements based not on certainty, but on instinct, intuition, a deeper intelligence woven into their very bones. This same principle applies to the spiritually evolved soul. When the inner transformation matures, the disappearance from the crowd ceases to be an act of avoidance and becomes an act of alignment. It is no longer about leaving something behind. It is about moving towards something finer, quieter, more authentic. There is a paradox here, one that reveals itself only to those who have walked far enough into themselves. The very thing that once felt like a burden, your sensitivity, your intuition, your capacity to see beneath the surface, becomes the compass that guides you. What once made you feel separate becomes what connects you to life more deeply than ever before. It is as if your inner vision, after exposing you to the illusions of the world, now begins to show you its hidden architecture, its beauty, its fragility, its exquisite design. This is the point where disappearance transforms into awakening. You realize that the crowd was never the enemy. It was the mirror. Every noise that once overwhelmed you reflected the noise you had not yet faced within yourself. Every mask you observed in others mirrored the masks you still carried. Every illusion that disturbed you revealed the illusions you had not yet dissolved. When this understanding settles in, something loosens inside you, like a knot finally understanding that its purpose was never to remain tied forever. This is where the evolution deepens. The spiritually awakened no longer withdraw from the world because it feels heavy. They withdraw because they no longer need the world to carry them. They no longer need its approval, its validation, its illusions of certainty. They have become their own architecture, their own cathedral, their own compass. They carry their silence the way others carry armor. They move with intention the way others move with habit. And the world, sensing this inner transformation, responds in mysterious ways. You begin to notice that certain doors close gently, without conflict, without drama. People who once occupied your life quietly fade to the edges, as if guided by an unseen hand. Situations that once entangled you lose their grip. Patterns that once repeated endlessly simply dissolve. It is not that you push them away, it is that your vibration no longer resonates with them. You have changed frequency, and in doing so, you have changed reality. And then something even more profound occurs. You begin to re-enter the world, not as a seeker, but as a witness. Not as someone hoping to be understood, but as someone content to understand. Not as someone trying to find belonging, but as someone who has realized that belonging is not found in crowds, but in presence. Your disappearance from the many allows you to appear fully to yourself. From this new state of awareness, you notice beauty where you once saw chaos. You notice humanity where you once saw confusion. You notice vulnerability where you once saw masks. And with this vision, compassion deepens. The spiritually evolved soul becomes not more distant, but more attuned. The world's noise no longer invades you because you now see its source. Minds afraid of silence, hearts afraid of stillness, souls afraid of their own reflection. You recognize this fear intimately because you once carried it too, and this recognition dissolves judgment, leaving only a quiet softness. This is the paradox that reveals the truth. Spiritually evolved souls disappear from the crowd not because they reject humanity, but because they have finally understood it. They see the fragile architecture holding each person together, the secret wounds, the forgotten dreams, the subtle longing for meaning hidden beneath every gesture. Their disappearance is not a turning away, but a turning inward, so they may hold this understanding without being consumed by the world's turbulence. Then gradually something shifts again. You begin to feel a new kind of pull, an inward expansion so vast it feels like a second heartbeat. You become aware that the solitude you once sought for protection now becomes a sanctuary for creation. Ideas gather in the silence, visions bloom in the stillness. You start to sense the threads connecting all things, the invisible currents moving beneath the surface of existence. You feel life as an intricate tapestry, and you begin to understand your place within it, not as an observer, but as a participant returning with new eyes. You re-enter the world differently. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You act less impulsively, but your actions carry meaning. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself because your presence speaks in a language only those ready to hear will understand. You do not chase connection, you attract resonance. You do not avoid the crowd, you simply move through it untouched by its illusions. And here lies the turning. The disappearance is the preparation. The solitude is the refinement. The distance is the initiation. You needed to step away to see clearly, to feel deeply, to awaken fully. And now, with this new awareness, you realize that disappearing was never the end. It was the threshold. In the final stretch of this inward journey, something subtle yet unmistakable begins to happen. The soul that once withdrew to protect its sensitivity now returns, carrying a calm that cannot be disturbed, a clarity that cannot be deceived, and a silence that speaks louder than any voice in the crowd. This is the true reason spiritually evolved souls disappear. They vanish only long enough to discover a self vast enough to reappear in the world without losing their essence.